The fog came down off the Chiapas highlands the morning they buried Don Evaristo Trujillo, and it settled over the wooden ranch house on the hill road as though it intended to stay. Inside, a woman named Amparo was already folding the old man's blankets. Welcome to Los Buenos Cuentos. If you believe that the people who serve quietly are sometimes the ones who deserve the most, leave us a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe so you never miss a story. This is the story of a woman who spent 8 years caring for a man everyone else had forgotten, and of what she found when the lawyers and the land agents arrived and told her that the ranch she had kept alive with her own hands was not hers to keep, and of how, in the end, the truth turned out to be written somewhere they had not thought to look. Amparo Gutierrez had come to work for Don Evaristo when she was 31 years old, and he was 78, a widower with a bad hip and worse eyesight, and a wooden ranch in the hills outside San Cristobal de las Casas that his children, 2 sons, both living in the capital, had not visited in 4 years. She had come because the work was there and she needed it, and because the woman who recommended her said Don Evaristo was difficult but fair, which turned out to be accurate on both counts. She cooked for him. She cleaned for him. She drove him to the doctor in the old borrowed truck on the days his hip would not allow the walk to the road. She learned which foods he could eat and which made him miserable, which subjects made him talk for an hour and which made him go silent for a day. She learned the ranch, its seasons, its moods, the way the wooden walls expanded in the rain and contracted in the dry cold, and made sounds at night that frightened people who did not know them. She learned the fig tree in the back garden that produced twice a year if you knew when to water it, and the small dog, a brown terrier mix with no name that Don Evaristo called simply El Perro, who slept at the foot of his bed and had appointed himself the official judge of everyone who came to the door. The sons came twice in 8 years, once when Don Evaristo had a fall and was briefly in the hospital, and once at Christmas 3 years ago, when they stayed 2 nights and left before the new year. Their names were Rodrigo and Damon. They were polite to Amparo in the way that people are polite to furniture, not unkind, simply not quite seeing her as a person whose inner life required consideration. Don Evaristo saw her. That was the difference. He was difficult and demanding and had opinions about the correct way to fold a blanket that he was not shy about sharing. But he saw her. He asked about her family in Comitan. He remembered the names of her sisters. When she was sick for a week with a bad cough one winter, he made himself coffee, badly, rather than wake her, and left it on the table with a note that said, "Rest, the coffee can wait." She kept the note. It was in the pocket of her second dress, the one she wore on Sundays. He died on a Thursday, quietly, in his own bed, with El Perro at his feet and Amparo in the next room. He was 86 years old. She had known for 3 weeks that it was coming. She had held his hand at the end and told him the fig tree was blooming again, which was true, and that the ranch was in good order, which was also true, and that he should go without worrying, which was the kindest thing she knew how to say. She was folding his blankets the morning of the burial, because that was what there was to do, and because keeping her hands busy kept the grief at a manageable distance, and because the blanket, an old cobija, thick wool, patched in 3 places with fabric that didn't quite match the original, was the one she had mended herself over the years, and it deserved to be folded properly. She did not know yet, that morning, that the 2 sons had retained a lawyer. She did not know that the lawyer had already filed a claim on the ranch, and on everything in it, naming Rodrigo and Daman as the sole heirs and making no mention of any other arrangement. She did not know that a man named Licenciado Peralta had visited the municipal property office in San Cristobal 3 days before the burial and had submitted documentation that described Don Evaristo's estate as straightforward and uncontested. She would find out soon enough. And what she found out, when she found it, was going to be more complicated than Licenciado Peralta had planned for. The first sign came at the burial itself. Rodrigo arrived with the lawyer at his side, which Amparo noticed but filed away, because grief arranges itself in strange configurations, and she was not going to assume the worst at a graveside. She stood at the back of the small group. Amparo had followed her from the ranch and sat beside her feet without being told. The priest said the words. The fog was still in the hills. After, at the ranch, Rodrigo found her in the kitchen. He said, carefully, with the particular gentleness of someone delivering news they know is unwelcome, that the estate would need to be processed through the proper legal channels, that the ranch would be assessed, that her situation, of course, would be considered, and that she would be given adequate time to make arrangements. What arrangements? Amparo asked. For finding another position, he said. We'll give you 2 months. More than fair, given the circumstances. Amparo looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the cobija folded on the chair in the corner, the one she had mended 3 times with fabric she had bought herself. Then she looked back at Rodrigo. Your father told me something different, she said. Rodrigo's expression did not change. My father, he said, was not in a position, toward the end, to make clear decisions. He left the kitchen before she could answer. That was on a Thursday. By the following Monday, she had found out about the lawyer's filing at the municipal office. And by the following Wednesday, she had found out something else, something that Licenciado Peralta had not found. Because he had looked in the filing cabinet in Don Evaristo's study and had found exactly what he expected to find, and had therefore not looked further. Amparo knew there was a further. She knew because Don Evaristo had told her 2 years ago, on a rainy afternoon when he was in one of his talking moods, that he had made a proper will. Not with a notary in San Cristobal, he said. He did not trust the notary in San Cristobal, for reasons he described at some length. He had gone to Cumitan, to a notary whose family had done business with his family for 40 years, and he had done it properly, with witnesses and a seal and a copy sent to the state registry. He had not told her what the will said, but he had told her it existed, and he had told her where the copy was. It was not in the filing cabinet. It was under the fig tree, not buried, placed inside a waterproof metal cylinder of the kind used for maps, screwed shut, tucked into the hollow where the fig tree's largest root curved away from the trunk and created a natural shelf about 6 inches above the ground. She had seen Don Evaristo crouched there once, years ago, and asked what he was doing, and he had said he was checking the roots, which she had believed because it was a plausible thing to believe about a man who cared about his trees. She found it on a Wednesday evening, when the light was low and Amparo was beside her, and no one else was on the ranch. The cylinder came open with some effort. Inside, sealed in an oilskin wrap, was a copy of the will, notarized, dated, bearing the seal of the registry in Cumitan, and beside it, folded once, a letter addressed to Amparo in Don Evaristo's handwriting. She sat down in the dirt with her back against the fig tree and read the letter first. It was not long. He wrote that he knew she would find this, because she was the only person who paid attention to what he actually did, rather than what he appeared to do. He wrote that the ranch was hers, that he had left it to her in the will, along with Amparo and the fig tree and the old cobija, which he noted she had mended enough times that it was practically hers already. He wrote that his sons had been informed of the will's existence, if not its contents, and that Licenciado Peralta, should he appear, was not to be trusted, because Rodrigo had employed him before, in a matter involving a property dispute with a neighbor, and the outcome had not been honest. He had written the letter knowing she might need exactly this. Knowing, the way difficult and fair men sometimes know things, what was going to happen after he was gone. She sat there a long time. El Perro pressed against her side, and she let him. The highland dark was coming in from the east, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth and the faint sweetness of the fig tree's leaves, and she read the letter a second time, then a third. Not because the words changed, but because she needed to hear his voice in them more than once. She had spent 8 years being necessary to someone. She had cooked and cleaned and folded and driven and listened and stayed. And she had done all of it without requiring acknowledgement. Because that was the arrangement, and also because she was not someone who required acknowledgement in order to know her own value. But this was something different from acknowledgement. This was being seen clearly enough that a man had thought, 2 years before his death, about what she would face after he was gone, and had arranged things so that she would not face it alone. She pressed her hand flat on the letter. She let herself feel the full weight of it. Then she got up, brushed the dirt from her skirt, wrapped the documents back in the oilskin, tucked the cylinder under her arm, and went inside to make coffee. What Licenciado Peralta was about to discover, neither he nor Rodrigo had imagined. Amparo sat under the fig tree until the light failed, and El Perro put his chin on her knee, and the night sounds of the highland began. Then she went inside, made herself coffee, and spread the documents on the kitchen table in the lamplight. She read the will 4 times. She looked at the seal of the Cometin registry, and the notary's signature, and the names of the 2 witnesses, both of whom, she noted, were still living. She wrapped the cobija around her shoulders because the highland nights were cold, and she sat there at the kitchen table in Don Evaristo's ranch with his dog and his blanket and his will. And she thought about what to do next. She thought about a man named Felipe. Felipe Cordova was not someone she had known long. He had come to the ranch 4 months ago, hired for 2 weeks to repair the back fence, and had stayed 3 because Don Evaristo liked how he worked. He was 38 years old and from Tuxtla, and he had come to San Cristobal the way some people come to the highlands, to put distance between themselves and something that had happened. He did not talk about the something. But he worked with the concentrated quietness of a man whose hands are doing one thing while his mind is doing another. And Don Evaristo, who recognized that particular silence, had asked Amparo after the first week whether she thought the young man was all right. "I think he's getting there," she had said. "That's enough," Don Evaristo had said. Felipe had left when the fence was done, but he had come back twice to check on Don Evaristo in the last weeks, and he had been at the burial standing separately from both groups, not with the son's party, not with Amparo, but present, which was its own statement. When he left that day, he had said to Amparo, quietly, that if she needed anything she could send word to the hardware store in the lower market where his cousin worked. She sent word on Thursday morning. In the days between finding the will and Felipe's arrival, Amparo kept the ranch the way she had always kept it. She rose before light. She fed El Perro. She made coffee on the wood stove and drank it on the porch while the fog moved through the highland pines. She watered the fig tree. She folded Don Evaristo's blanket each morning and placed it on the chair in the corner of the main room, because leaving it folded was a way of keeping order, and keeping order was the only thing she knew how to do when everything else felt like open water. Rodrigo and Daman had gone back to the capital after the burial. Licenciado Peralta had come by once, on the Tuesday, and walked the property with a clipboard in a manner that suggested he had already decided what everything was worth. He did not speak to Amparo directly. He spoke to the space above her left shoulder in the way that certain men address people they have categorized as temporary. He took photographs of the house, the tool shed, the corral, and the fig tree, and left without explaining anything. That night, Amparo sat at the kitchen table and thought about what Don Evaristo had said 2 years ago on a rainy afternoon about the will in Cometon. She thought about it for a long time. She thought about the fig tree and the way its largest root curved away from the trunk. She thought about the afternoon she had seen him crouched there and what he had said about the roots. She went out with a torch. She found the cylinder in under a minute. The daily ritual in those first weeks without Don Evaristo was the same as it had always been, except for the absence at the center of it. The coffee was still made. The blanket was still folded. El Perro still slept at the foot of the bed. Her bed now, in the room she had moved into, because the cold in the small side room where she used to sleep had become difficult. The fig tree still needed water. The highland mornings still came in fog and cold, and the particular birdsong of the cloud forest, a sound so layered and persistent that after 8 years Amparo heard it as silence rather than noise. She was not entirely alone. Doa Hortensia from the road below came twice in the first week, once with food and once simply to sit. The young man who had tended the lower slopes coffee trees for the past 3 seasons came to ask whether he should continue, and Amparo said yes, and paid him from the household account Don Evaristo had left accessible, which had enough in it for 2 months if she was careful. Word had also begun to travel that Licenciado Peralta had been asking questions in the village about Amparo, about her arrangement with Don Evaristo, about whether anyone had witnessed any conversations between them about the property. Doa Hortensia reported this with the flat expression of a woman who finds such behavior entirely predictable and not worth dignifying with surprise. Amparo listened and filed it away and went back to watering the fig tree. She thought about Felipe on Wednesday. By Thursday, she had decided. He came Thursday afternoon. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the documents and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "The seal is legitimate. I know what the Cometon Registry seal looks like. My uncle was a notary there." He paused. Peralta's filing listed the property as uncontested. That was either an error or a lie. "Which do you think?" Amparo asked. Felipe looked at the filing copy she had obtained from the municipal office. "I think Rodrigo told him what he wanted to find, and Peralta looked until he found it and stopped there. He set the paper down. This will invalidate that claim entirely, but you'll need someone to present it correctly. I don't have money for a lawyer. I know a law student in Cometon who does pro bono work for the Rural Legal Aid Office. She's not a lawyer yet, but she works with one who is." He paused again, looking at the will. "She'll want to see this." Amparo nodded. Felipe looked up. "He chose well," he said. "Leaving it to you." Amparo looked at the cobija on the chair. "He said it was practically mine already," she said, "because I'd mended it so many times." Felipe almost smiled. It was the first time she had seen him close to it. The legal process took 6 weeks. The law student, a young woman named Valentina, sharp and methodical and entirely unimpressed by Licenciado Peralta's credentials, presented the will and its registry copy to the municipal property office, and simultaneously filed a complaint regarding the original claim's omission of the known testament. The notary in Cometon confirmed the document's authenticity. The 2 witnesses confirmed their signatures. The state registry confirmed the filing date, which predated Peralta's claim by 2 years. Licenciado Peralta came to the ranch once during those 6 weeks. He brought a man he called an independent assessor, and he came with the confidence of someone who does not yet know that the ground has shifted beneath him. Amparo received them on the porch. El Perro sat beside her and regarded them with the flat, considered hostility of an animal that has learned to read a room. Peralta said he had new information suggesting that the document Amparo had presented was a copy, and that the original filing should take precedence. He said it with the practiced smoothness of a man who has said similar things in similar situations many times. Amparo had the Comet notary's direct contact information written on a card in her apron pocket. She held it out to Peralta. "Call him," she said. "He's expecting to hear from you. He has the original registration log and the witness's contact details. He said to tell you that he has done business with the Trujillo family for 40 years and takes the matter of document integrity very seriously." Peralta looked at the card. He looked at Amparo. He looked at El Perro, who had not moved. He took the card. He did not call from the ranch. He and the assessor got back in their vehicle and drove down the hill road, and Valentina, who had been inside the house listening through the open window, came out onto the porch and said nothing for a moment. Then said, "That's the end of it. He knows it. He'll file the withdrawal by Friday." She was right. The withdrawal came on Thursday. Doa Hortensia heard about it before the ink was dry, because Doa Hortensia heard about everything before the ink was dry, and she came up the hill road that same afternoon with a bottle of mezcal from her son-in-law's distillery and a satisfaction on her face that she made no effort to conceal. Don Evaristo would have enjoyed this, she said. He would have said it was all perfectly obvious from the beginning, and he didn't understand what everyone was so worked up about, Amparo said. Doa Hortensia laughed, which was a sound like a door opening in a house that had been shut too long. Rodrigo called once, 2 days later. Amparo answered. He said he had not known about the will in Cometin, which may or may not have been true, and that he was sorry for how things had begun. He said it without entirely meaning it, which she could hear, but she accepted it because the alternative was to carry something heavy that she had not been given the strength to carry. She told him the ranch was in good condition. She told him he was welcome to visit if he wanted to see where his father had spent his last years. She told him El Perro was well. He did not visit. But the call was enough to close something. By the time the coffee trees on the lower slope of the ranch put out their first blossoms of the season, Amparo had applied for the small agricultural support grant that Don Evaristo had qualified for, but never filed. Felipe had helped her with the paperwork. He had also, over the weeks of the legal process, repaired the back gate that the fence work had never quite fixed, rehung the 2 doors that had swollen in the rains, and built a proper sleeping kennel for El Perro, who accepted it with the dignity of an animal that had expected nothing less. On the first Sunday after the property was confirmed in her name, Amparo cooked. She made a proper meal, black beans from the garden, tamales with the corn from the lower field, coffee from the estate's own trees. Doa Hortensia from the road below came. Valentina came from Cometin. The priest from the chapel in the village came, as he came to every gathering in his circuit, reliable as weather. Felipe came and sat at the corner of the table and ate without ceremony and helped wash the dishes after, which no one asked him to do. The fog came down off the highlands in the late afternoon, the way it always did, and settled around the wooden ranch house the way it had settled the morning they buried Don Evaristo, not as a weight, Amparo understood now, but as a presence, as something familiar that returns. She brought out the cobija when the evening turned cold and spread it across her shoulders, and sat on the porch while the others talked inside, and El Perro came and sat on her feet, and the fig tree at the back of the house was a dark shape in the fog, and beyond it the hills were going invisible in the dusk, and everything was quiet in the particular way of a place that has finally become what it was always meant to be. The door that opens out of compassion, out of 8 years of folded blankets and remembered names and coffee left on a table with a note, is sometimes the only door that was ever truly meant for you. Amparo Gutierrez did not inherit a ranch because she expected to. She inherited it because she was the one who stayed, and the one who paid attention, and the one whose hands had already made the place hers long before any paper said so. Have you ever found a home where you least expected to find one? If this story touched something in your heart, leave your comment below. Give it a like, subscribe to Los Buenos Cuentos, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Share it with someone who has given quietly for a long time and deserves to know that what they give does not go unseen. Until the next story. And remember, the ones who serve without asking are sometimes exactly the ones a place has been waiting for all along.